Hello everybody, and welcome to our first info night of the winter semester. We're so glad to have you all back. Tonight we're going to be discussing Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and some of its subtypes. We'd originally scheduled a guest speaker to come in tonight to tell you all about her experiences with EDS, but unfortunately she had to cancel at the last minute. She sent me what she intended to say, and I'm going to tell you in her stead. So the first question you may have is likely, what the heck is EDS? There's my screen. Sorry, I got a new laptop. I'm having fun with technology. So really, what is EDS? EDS deals with the type of tissue in the body called connective tissue, which, as you may have guessed, helps to connect body parts to each other. It's pretty integral. The specific type of connective tissue impacted in EDS is collagen, and it can be found in all kinds of different body parts. It's mostly found in tendons, skin, and ligaments, though it is also present in blood vessels and a compound in your teeth called dentin. Collagen is one of the main structural supports of the cells. It's very essential for human functioning, and it has a pretty unique protein structure. If you care about that kind of thing, typically it's got a glycine, X, proline, or hydroxyproline structure, making it very stable due to the repeated glycine every third amino acid. Glycine's the smallest. If you care about protein, it's kind of interesting. So EDS is then the breakdown of collagen in the body, which can cause massive problems in joint stability and in vasculature. The symbol of EDS is a zebra, partially because people with EDS often have lots of stretch marks. There's also a very famous saying in medicine that goes, if you hear hoofbeats, it's probably a horse and not a zebra, meaning that rare diseases are less likely to be assumed to be the cause of a symptom than a more common disease. EDS is pretty rare, so they've adopted the zebra to kind of remind medical professionals that zebras actually do exist. You know, you might just be at a zoo instead of at a ranch. Metaphor only goes so far, but it's pretty interesting. So there's a lot of subtypes of EDS, and I'm not going to have time to get into detail with all of them, but many of them share very similar characteristics and comorbidities. So I feel pretty comfortable giving a more of a general overview rather than a lecture on genetics. Arthrochalasia deals with joints, and it's quite severe, manifesting often in the hips. Brittle cornea syndrome is, you guessed it, in the corneas mostly. Cardiac vascular mostly deals with structural integrity issues in the cardiac system, such as valves of the heart. Classical EDS is very general. It deals with almost all the bodily systems, and a hallmark of which is stretchy skin. Classical-like is pretty evident from the name. It's close to classic EDS, but not quite, since it deals more with unusual bruising and scarring, so it's a little bit more skin-based than just classic EDS. Dermatosparaxis is skin-related. Hypermobile EDS deals with joint integrity, so that's very fun. That can cause a whole host of issues. And musculocontractural deals with how the muscles move and contract, often resulting in a very high resting muscle tone. So muscle tone is kind of the degree to which your muscles are tensed at rest, and a high muscle tone will put strain on your joints and the rest of your body because it's not really anticipating to be moving. It also uses up a lot more energy than it needs to. Myopathic is again in the muscles. Periodontal relates to the teeth and gums, dealing with that compound dentin I mentioned earlier. And spondylosplastic, I did not pronounce that right, but we're going to go with it. It's a big word. It causes shortened stature and bowed limbs, and vascular is mostly contained to the structural integrity of the veins and arteries. So there's really quite a broad range of different types of EDS. All of these subtypes are linked to a specific gene or set of genes, with the exception of hypermobile EDS. Makes it a lot harder to test for HEDS. So I now want to go over some of the symptoms that are common to all of the forms of EDS in different degrees, but many people with EDS will experience some amount of these symptoms. All of the forms of EDS impact the joints to some degree. Many people with EDS experience muscle and nerve pain, so that's myalgia and neuralgia, from aches and pains to kind of tingling, burning, numb sensations. There's also a fundamental instability in the joints, leading many people with EDS to deal with dislocations and subluxations in the joints. So a dislocation is when it goes fully out of joint or fully out of where it's supposed to be. So for example, your hip is a ball and socket joint. A dislocation would be where the head of the femur actually dislocates from the pelvic girdle. I don't actually remember the names for these bones, but dislocates from the hip pocket. Whereas a subluxation is kind of more of a maladjustment or a movement when there isn't supposed to be any, so kind of in the wrong direction, i.e. like the head coming apart from the little cup that it sits in. Very painful, can be very disabling. And it can also cause damage over time, which is really not ideal, so it is typically a kind of degenerative thing. There's also a lot of muscle tension and weakness, typically with the tense muscles overcompensating for weaker muscles. Lots of people also experience hernias, where muscles kind of separate from each other and allow an organ to poke out and kind of rest against the skin instead of the muscles. That's really not ideal. It's pretty dangerous to have your organs just kind of out there. That's part of the purpose of why we have so many muscles and all the bones and everything. This kind of goes along with pelvic floor weakness, where many people can see herniation, prolapse, where your organs kind of fall out of the hole a little bit, and incontinence, or you're not able to hold your urine or your feces. Neuropathy is just another fancy way of saying nerve pain, but it's a bit more specific and formed from nerve damage, and that results in a very painful, tingling sort of feeling. You may be more common with the term in reference to diabetic neuropathy. That's a nerve damage thing. There's also just a lot of generalized pain involved, whether that's from chronic migraines, joint wear and tear, gum disease. Pain can be caused by any number of these things. Skin is one of the other major organs impacted in EDS of all types. One of the ways in which this manifests is unusually soft or velvety skin, and that comes along with hyperextensity or stretchiness. So, if you take the back of your hand and you can kind of stretch it up like this, people with EDS can do that a lot more than people who don't have EDS. It's pretty interesting. This also means that the skin is extra fragile and it bruises fairly easily. People with EDS often experience severe scarring. The nickname for this translates to cigarette paper because of the almost striped, thin texture you can see. People with EDS also have lots of stretch marks, which again is partially why their emblem is a zebra, because their skin just does not have enough connective tissue in it to hold where it is, so it stretches out, forming a bit of scar tissue. Stretch marks do typically form when someone's gaining a lot of weight, or maybe when they're pregnant, or their body's changing a lot. But people with EDS will experience stretch marks without having any of those other factors involved. Lots of organ systems are also impacted. Many organ systems are extremely fragile and can rupture, including the arteries, which, as you may guess, is a really big problem. You kind of need your blood to stay inside of those. Lots of people with EDS also have scoliosis, which is a curvature in the spine along the coronal plane, if you care about that kind of thing. So it's where it curves out kind of towards your ribs, either to your right or to your left side, when it isn't supposed to move side to side that way at all. That can cause all kinds of muscle imbalances as well, which can exacerbate joint injuries and so on and so forth. Very fun time. The sclera are often fragile as well, and those are the whites of your eyes that encase everything that isn't your cornea, so it's the tough structural part of your eye. Congenital hip dislocations are also common, though they're kind of the hallmark of arthrochalasia EDS. Many people also have very poor muscle tone, which makes it very difficult for them to control their bodies and to participate in lots of physical activities. This usually comes along with just like a low-grade chronic pain, but it's pretty background and very constant. Lots of people with EDS also experience severe gum disease, again because collagen is found in dentin, which forms in your teeth and your gums. EDS is as common as 1 in 3,500 people in some subtypes, though some are as rare as 1 in a million. There's also a pretty big gender imbalance in the rates of diagnosed EDS. I found this graph, which you might find very interesting. Many more women than men are diagnosed with EDS. So as you can see on the right-hand side of the graph, the sort of peachy color is by age, how many women have been diagnosed with EDS, and on the left in the bluish color, that is how many men by age have been diagnosed with EDS. It's pretty interesting. I always feel like graphs like this really help me to visualize statistics. These numbers don't really take into account how underdiagnosed hypermobile EDS likely is. There's also an aspect of hypermobility called hypermobile spectrum disorder, which is less severe in outcome than HEDS, but it's still pretty painful. Like it still has a pretty big impact on your quality of life. EDS has a ton of comorbidities that many people with EDS experience, one of which being GI function disorders. This can include anything from irritable bowel syndrome to food intolerances to gastroparesis. Gastroparesis is where the muscles of your stomach are kind of paralyzed, so you're not able to digest your food as well. That causes a lot of pain and nausea, and you can become malnourished. Dysautonomia is also a really big one. This is the poor functioning of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls things like blood pressure and heart rate, and a dysfunction of this system can cause things like arrhythmias, heat sensitivities, difficulties regulating one's temperature, and episodes of fainting. So one form of dysautonomia is called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and that's when your change in posture, for example, like laying down to sitting, sitting to standing, that can kind of cause your heart to freak out and go way too fast, and then you faint because your body is nervous as to why your heart's going that fast. That one can also be pretty disabling. Other people will also experience asthma, osteoporosis, and migraines. Mast cell activation disorder is another one commonly seen with EDS, and it's basically an extremely overreactive and very, very severe allergic response, often resulting in anaphylaxis when your throat closes up and you can't really breathe. Chronic fatigue and arthritis are also very, very common. It takes a lot of energy to regulate your muscles when your ligaments don't work. And of course, arthritis would result from joint damage, from joint instability. So I have a few short videos for you here. This first one discusses ableism. The second one is somebody relocating a dislocated joint with a pretty gnarly noise, so be advised if you're uncomfortable with that sort of thing. And the third is somebody discussing some of the things that could have gotten the diagnosis earlier if the doctors were trained in EDS. Let's see if this is going to play like this.
See this what we not finna do. 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 This not what we about to do.
So Annie Elaney is one of my favorite disabled activists on the internet. Their content is phenomenal. I'm a huge fan. Please check them out. They discuss a lot of intersectional topics.
Coffee. Oh, I just dislocated my wrist. Oh, God. There we go. All right.
Do you notice how casually they pop their wrist back into place? He must be pretty used to that kind of thing. That just shows you, like, most people would be kind of paralyzed by pain, but he's just kind of trucking on like it's no big deal. That's just his Tuesday. So that's kind of the extent to which some people experience joint dislocations with EDS.
10 signs of my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that were overlooked. Enjoy! Complaining about joint pain from an early age that was always dismissed as growing pains or anxiety. Being one of the most athletic kids in my class to not being able to keep up with the least athletic kids in my class and dropping all sports because it hurt too much. Coming home from school with bruises that I could not explain how I got. Always injuring myself in gym class. Being the most flexible person on my cheerleading team. And by that I mean overextended splits for days. Irregular periods. Worsening eyesight that never seemed to stabilize. I would always catch the colds and flus going around school. Being extremely clumsy. No matter how much I slept, I was always tired. I had a high, narrow palate with dental crowding until I had a palate expander and braces.
So that last point that they brought up, the high, narrow palate with dental crowding, that sign can often be missed because orthodontics are pretty common. So I know for example, all of my lower teeth were kind of smushed together and overlapping a little bit, which is what they mean by dental crowding. And of course, before getting braces, I had a very narrow palate, so I had an expander. So a lot of people as adults won't show those signs even though they were born with them. That can be a big barrier for diagnosis. So like I mentioned at the beginning of my talk tonight, Lauren is unfortunately no longer able to make it tonight, but she sent me what she wants me to communicate to you guys. So I'm just going to read off of the sheet that she sent me. Again, a huge thank you to her for sharing her story. EDS is something that has always affected my life in many ways, but it wasn't until recently that it really started to impact my everyday life. Growing up, I always had pain in my joints, but every doctor I went to called it growing pains, called me a hypochondriac, or dismissed me. At 18, the pain grew worse and spread all over my body. I became so exhausted I could barely get out of bed each day, and I started to become extremely depressed due to my symptoms and the fact that nobody believed me. I went to over half a dozen doctors, begging for someone to take me seriously to help me find answers, but no one believed anything was wrong. I started to become dizzy upon standing and became nauseous after eating anything. In early 2020, I finally found a family doctor who believed my pain and my other symptoms. He told me he didn't know what was wrong, but he was going to connect me with any doctor who could figure it out. Immediately knew that he would be the person to change my life and give me a diagnosis. I was referred to a rheumatologist who gave me the diagnosis of a rare autoinflammatory disease called Still's disease. We started treatment, including steroids and disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, and nothing got better. The frustration continued, and in February of 2021, I was hospitalized for a week due to an incredibly complex and dangerous migraine that left me bedridden for 11 days. I was then referred to the incredible Alberta Neurologic Centre. At the ANC, I was diagnosed with complex chronic migraines, and it finally gave me one diagnosis. When I was out of the hospital, I was seen by my cardiologist, who did some testing and diagnosed me with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS. I brought these diagnoses to my family doctor, and he referred me to a new rheumatologist to get a second opinion on my Still's disease diagnosis. As soon as I saw him, he told me he wasn't convinced I had Still's disease. Shortly after seeing him, a close friend of mine shared that she was just diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I had heard of EDS, but I didn't know the symptoms. As soon as I looked it up, I immediately knew I had EDS. I'm very hypermobile, I have incredibly soft and fragile skin, I've dislocated multiple joints, and I have POTS and digestive issues. At my next appointment, I brought these concerns up to my rheumatologist, and he diagnosed me with EDS. I cannot even begin to explain how big of a relief it was. This diagnosis also allowed me to be diagnosed with gastroparesis by my gastroenterologist. All too often, individuals with EDS face dismissal, pushback, and gaslighting by doctors like I did. This is why it's so important to raise awareness for EDS. Most doctors I see don't know about or understand EDS, which leads to extremely long periods of time between first symptoms and a diagnosis. So many individuals with EDS are misdiagnosed at first, and they have to undergo unnecessary medical treatment. EDS is under-recognized in the medical community, and raising awareness of it is key to getting diagnosed and helping people with it. So thank you to Lauren, and once again, for sending me her story. I'm very happy she felt comfortable enough to share that with us. Unfortunately, she couldn't come tonight, but we're very grateful to have her experience on board. The organization we're going to be supporting this month is the ILC Foundation, which supports people experiencing EDS as well as other connective tissue and chronic pain conditions. So they fund research and advocacy, they provide patient support, and they have a pretty broad impact. Our next info night is going to be on March 8th, and the topics I want you to choose from are epilepsy, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, and depression or other mood disorders. This QR code is going to take you to the survey, and the link is written just below there, or if you prefer, then Rowan will be sending out the survey link tomorrow. So there are a handful of awareness days coming up soon. World Cancer Day was on February 4th. Yeah, it's the 8th today. That was on February 4th. It's currently Congenital Heart Disease Awareness Week, so that runs from the 7th to the 14th. Rare Disease Day, like EDS, is on February 28th, and it is also Psychology Month. So that's kind of all I have for you tonight. Thanks again to Lauren for sharing her experiences with us, and I and the other execs wish her all of the best. All of our contact information is here, so that's our email, our Instagram, and our website. So anyone have any questions for me?